You wake. You think, one more life, one more chance, round and round. But some souls don't wake up again. They refuse. They break the chain. They aren't zombies in the wheel, they vanish from it, or worse, they turn into something else entirely. That's what this part is about, the moment a soul rebels. Think of reincarnation as a cosmic conveyor belt, lives, lessons, deaths, rebirths, relentless motion. But imagine a soul that says, no more. It steps off. It detaches. It scorns the cycle. That act is seismic. It tears at the structure of worlds. Because the system, call it karma, call it cosmic order, expects compliance. Refusal is a mutiny. Now, the mainstream narrative sells reincarnation as a kind of spiritual fairness. You do good, you come back in better shape, you screw up, you pay. But that's propaganda from safe zones. The deeper, darker stories, the ones the popular channels sometimes mention in passing, hint at consequences no one wants to talk about. This rebellion doesn't look peaceful. It looks like rupture. The soul that refuses is unruly. It can be dragged back, restrained, manipulated, or it can flee so far it becomes a shadow entity. It may exist between planes. It may hang in limbo, serrated on the edges of existence. It may be hungry. Let me draw you two possible profiles. Profile A, the liberated soul. One that truly completed all its lessons, anomaly of anomalies. It steps off the wheel clean. It knows the mechanism. It's done. It's invisible to cycles. Profile B, the broken soul. One that tried to refuse but couldn't escape. Now trapped, limping, fractured. It's half in, half out. It bleeds energy. It latches onto realms and people to sustain itself. The most disturbing is Profile B. That's where legends brood. The kind of spiritual horror nobody admits but everybody whispers about. Because when a soul fails to rebirth but also fails to transcend, you get a parasite, a specter, an anti-incarnation. Let me be blunt, refusing that belt ride doesn't equal peace. It can equal torment. These souls are sometimes said to haunt dreams, whisper destiny, infect spiritual fields. They hide in the cracks, where no life wants to tread. People on regression forums narrate stories of lives, or non-lives, that resist returning. Some under hypnosis claim their souls were pulled, like magnets snapped, into void corridors. They speak of an empty theater, seats gone, no actors, but presence. No life. No death. A waiting room of cosmic punishment or rejection. And then there are medium reports, entities that appear before seances, distant, cold, refusing to cross over or reincarnate. They glare with omission. They don't have to explain. They just resent. Let me fast forward you to the theological knockdown. If souls can refuse, the entire model of moral accounting, reward, punishment, cosmic justice collapses. Because if you can just say no more, then your karmic debts, what happens to them? Are they left in limbo? Does the ledger stay open? The narrative that justice is imposed in next life is shaken. Spiritual entrepreneurs tout that finished souls as proof of progress. You're so advanced, you don't have to come back. They paint an image, I have no more karma, I'm done. But don't let that be sanitized. That claim carries acid. Because it says, I'm above the system. And systems rarely tolerate above-system anomalies. That's where suppression, dismissal, censorship come in. So the first blow, refusal, is a wound in the spiritual economy. It tears the fabric of cause and effect. It challenges who designs the system. Who enforces it? If a soul can bow out, the system loses total control. That's heretical. I'm telling you now, the moment a soul refuses is more violent than a battle. It's a breaker. It's a shock wave that echoes through levels. You don't see it. But it's felt as tension, as anomalous presences, as people who pick up psychic distortions around them. You, the viewer, have you ever felt something haunting your own edges, something pushing you to ask what's beyond life and beyond death? That discomfort is the crack. It is the prelude to that refusal, the soul sensing the trap, trembling not with fear but with revolt. In many esoteric circles they call those souls post-incarnational. They are no longer marketing souls that must return. They have exited, or tried to. They stand in the wings of existence. Some call them watchers, guardians, or archons, names to hide the horror. Some call them exiles. Here's a violent image. You're driving across a dimension, a road made of lifetimes, and at some junction the soul zips off the guardrail and disappears into the abyss. The road keeps going, others drive on. But that soul is missing. Gone. And from that missing slot shadows seep. Weird anomalies in that junction. Dark spots. Distortions. These souls sometimes become the wild cards in reincarnation charts. They glitch numbering, they defy lineage, they don't show up in genealogical karmic charts. You ask a medium, who am I in past lives? The maps are black. Because the soul refused to leave the ledger. Refused the chain. The cost? It may be identity fracture. The soul's memory is shredded. Its intent becomes obscure. It no longer binds to its own history. It ghosts. It is untethered. That's what the darkest narrators warn. Some souls refuse, but in refusing, they lose themselves. To keep you engaged, imagine you discover an old chart of your past lives, all slots empty. The medium shrugs. You shrug. You realize, maybe your soul refused to inhabit previous bodies. Or got refused. Either way, no continuity you can trace. That is one face of refusal. Don't let anyone fool you. This is not a romantic higher soul. This is fracture. This is escape through a wound. The soul refusing isn't always triumphant. Often, it's painful, unstable, torn. The stories you rarely hear, souls that tried to refuse but got dragged back forcibly, as if karmic enforcers shackle them. They wrench them into cycles. These narratives depict cosmic overlords policing refusal. The break is never clean for many. The soul is punished, forced, realigned, or shackled to life it rejected. Then some say, souls that refuse may transform roles. Instead of incarnating, they manage reincarnation for others. They become architects of lifetimes. They don't have to live, they design. They tweak karmic payloads. They shepherd newcomers. So refusal sometimes becomes a higher gig in esoteric systems. You quit the suffering, but you take the control booth. You refuse one life, then you administer many. But ironically, you never get to live again. We're peeling back illusions. You see, refusal isn't simple. It's not just saying, I'm done. It's a war between the soul and the system. A war nobody in religious mainstream wants you to hear. Because if refusal is possible, then authority, ecclesiastical, cosmic, spiritual, can be contested. This is the part most churches and dogmas don't want you to hear. Religion built walls around authority, and here we punch through one. We're talking about how institutional religion has systematically shut down the idea of refusing reincarnation, not by debate, but by decree. This isn't polite theology. This is collision. Let's cut to it. From the moment doctrines became centralized, the concept of a soul repeatedly incarnating, and worse, refusing to reincarnate, became a threat. A threat to control. Because if souls could rebel, canonical authority would fracture. If believers believed in rebellion, they might question clerics. That's why doctrinal machinery rallied against reincarnation, not out of pure truth, but self-preservation. The fight against reincarnation was never only theological, it was political, institutional, system maintenance. In early Christian history, there were Gnostics, Hermeticists, and mystics who flirted with soul cycles. But the emerging Orthodox Church quashed them, labeling reincarnation heresy. And here's the brutal part, the refusal narrative, that a soul might step out entirely, That was the ultimate blasphemy. Because to refuse reincarnation means rejecting the finality of one judgment, rejecting the linear salvation narrative. It undermines the entire afterlife architecture: heaven, hell, judgment, salvation by faith or works. The Church needed souls to be bound, to reincarnate conceptually or spiritually, so that the promise, the threat, the grip would hold. We have to be clear, this oppression wasn't gentle. Heresiologists wrote condemnations, ecclesiastical courts anathematized reincarnation proponents, and entire mystics were silenced. Their teachings evaporated or were rebranded. The canon was shaped to exclude any notion of cyclic life. The theology that you live once, then judged became the standard not because it's obviously true, but because it posed zero threat to hierarchical control. Think about the logic imposed: if there is no second, third, fourth life, then your moral ledger, your destiny, your fate, hinge squarely on this one life. No do-overs, no cosmic cycles to balance. You're locked in. That's convenient for authority. If you screw up, too late. If you reject, shame, punishment, eternal consequence. No escape. Institutional religion turned reincarnation into a boundary offense. Cross it, and you risk excommunication, damnation, erasure. They wrapped it in moral urgency. They cast reincarnation as pagan, a detour, spiritual confusion. Every mystical text that hinted at soul cycles got reinterpreted or suppressed. And the refusal idea? They sanitized it into metaphor: refusal to sin, refusal to return to evil tendencies, not refusal of life itself. They flattened the radical into the palatable. They destroyed the dangerous versions. Some church fathers aggressively attacked reincarnation proponents. Some equated belief in multiple lives with idolatry or dualism. The institutional stance wasn't neutral, it was aggressive. They wanted the believer's mind sealed: soul evolves in one life, judged once, and moves on. Full stop. If someone inserted cyclical life or refusal, they had to be silenced. That's how doctrine solidified. Do not imagine this as mere clash of philosophical schools. This was power consolidation. Scriptures got interpreted in exclusivist ways, alternative texts got hidden or destroyed. The institutional narrative marginalized transmigration, reincarnation, cycles, refusal. The ones bold enough to whisper about refusing life were either exiled or recast as mystical allegorists. The galaxy of suppressed texts hides those whispers. We must examine a corner few bring up: ecclesiastical levers of shame and fear. If reincarnation existed, then clerics don't hold exclusive keys. The soul might wander in heresy, flee cycles, bypass sacraments. That undermined sacrifice, confession, clerical mediation, hierarchy. So the institutional assault targeted not just ideation but community. Anyone suggesting affinity with past lives or refusal was ostracized. Those doctrines became dangerous, subversive. You see influences of that in modern church culture. Talk about once born, once die, judgment day, resurrection of the body. Reincarnation doesn't fit easily there. Refusal to reincarnate is even more monstrous in that narrative: a soul rejecting divine return, rejecting redemption plan, rejecting resurrection order. So many theologians refuse to entertain it, casting attempts as deranged mysticism or deceit. Some denominations quietly adopt soft positions, talk about soul progression, spiritual evolution, but they never go so far as to allow refusal. They steer it as metaphor, spiritual growth, inner awakening. They avoid literal reincarnation. They especially shun literal refusal. Why? Because that cuts at the root of authority. You cannot have a member literally drop out of the structure. That's intolerable. Hear me, institutional religion didn't just oppose reincarnation, it defined the boundary so tightly that refusal is an unnameable concept in official theology. No doctrine, no catechism, no sermon dares mention the possibility of a soul walking away. That silence is intentional. That void is a defense. When the institution fights, it rewrites metaphors. When reincarnation is mentioned, it's charitable, secondary, a novelty, folklore, a mistaken pagan relic. Refusal is never literal, it's a spiritual refusal of sin, not a cosmic refusal of life. That distortion is by design. But let me jog you, there have been minor movements, unorthodox Christian sects, mystic fringe groups, who flirted with reincarnation, reincarnational forgiveness, or even refusal. They were hunted, burned, excommunicated. Their manuscripts were suppressed. Their momentum killed or absorbed. So we rarely see them now. The doctrine stands. The gatekeepers remain. They made sure the faithful never ask, "Can I refuse? Can I exit the cosmic loop?" The theology trains belief, only one life, one judgment, one chance. That's doctrinal armor. I want you to feel the pressure. Religion didn't just disbelieve refusal. It structurally erased it. It set up fences around souls so they cannot step out. Believers are convinced they're confined. They never explore rebellion because the very idea is unspoken, unthinkable. Now ask yourself, if the soul could refuse, the religious ladder, the promise of resurrection, Christ, judgment, all those systems are destabilized. That's why the suppression is fierce. That's why even modern evangelical circles treat reincarnation as spiritual poison. They fight it with scripture, history, fear, labels, heresy, false doctrine, deception. They make you afraid to explore. That's not education, that's containment. They weaponize authority, tradition, punishment, even social ostracism, to keep that rejection concept at bay. The silencing isn't gentle. It's coercive. And so the idea that a soul could refuse reincarnation is locked outside mainstream theology, left to the fringe, the occult, the taboo. All right, buckle up. Now we're diving into the philosophical guts, how major Eastern traditions, especially Buddhist thought, deal with the idea of refusing reincarnation. They don't treat it like a rebellious choice. They deconstruct it entirely. And that clash is raw, messy, and underexplored. In mainstream Buddhism, there's no permanent self to refuse anything. The doctrine of anatta, no self, obliterates personal will as it's commonly understood. If there is no fixed soul, how can you refuse reincarnation? To push that concept into Buddhist frameworks is to force a square peg into a round hole. The process is about conditions, not agents. Lives arise and vanish not because a soul boards and disembarks voluntarily, but because causes and conditions shift. Trying to inject the language of refusal into that system is a category error. Then look at how Buddhist texts talk about rebirth, not reincarnation in the sense of an immutable soul. They emphasize renewal of karmic flow. It's not that you come back. It's that the chain of cause and effect continues. To speak of refusal in this context is to misread the teachings. If nothing permanent persists, then refusing sounds dramatic, but it's a mismatch with the technical doctrine. Yet modern spiritual communities often graft the refusal narrative onto Buddhism anyway, creating hybrids that blur philosophy. Still, some less orthodox Buddhist streams, esoteric and tantric branches, have hinted at transcendence beyond cycles. But they rarely speak of refusal as a willful rebellion. They speak of nirvana, parinirvana, cessation. That's different framing. It's not I refuse to come back. It's the cycle is ended for me. It's quiet, final, dissolution of the chain. Here's where the tension lies. Spiritual authors or channels that embrace reincarnation and refusal often borrow Buddhist vocabulary, karma, liberation, emptiness, but they twist it. They reassign agency, reintroduce the self, reframe refusal as a soul's protest. That synthetic model clashes with the purist doctrine. It's a hybrid graft. This makes their narratives vulnerable. Purist Buddhists push back, that's not Buddhism, that's mystic mashup. Now, consider a case, someone says, I remember refusing to come back in my past life. A Buddhist scholar hears, impossible in orthodox terms. But spiritual channels interpret refusing to come back as advanced attainment. See that play? The choice to refuse becomes proof of spiritual elevation, not contradiction. And that's how modern rejection narratives subsume Buddhist language to claim legitimacy while ignoring internal consistency. Another point, if refusal were possible in a model of no-self, then causal link must be broken. But Buddhism holds that the chain of dependent origination, pratitya samutpada, doesn't snap because a decision is made. It continues until wisdom cuts it. You can't refuse in the traditional sense, you can only dissolve. So refusal understood as metaphoric is acceptable. But literal refusal? Traditional doctrine balks. The spiritual writers pushing refusal toe the line by reframing dissolution as refusal. That's rhetorical sleight of hand. Let's talk claims modern regression practitioners make. Someone in hypnosis claims memory of declining reincarnation. They often speak in soul language, not Buddhist categories. They claim pre-existence, soul agency, choice. That erases anatta. That draws strong pushback from Buddhist purists, who argue those memories are constructions, illusions, or confabulations. The inconsistency is glaring. You can't hold both the self-will refusal and no-self philosophy without tearing logic. Yet channels gloss over that inconsistency because the refusal story is seductive. It gives fans a notion of autonomy, of exit strategy. Also, Buddhist tradition talks about arahant, bodhisattva, pratyeka. Certain beings delay final liberation to help others. That looks superficially like refusal, but it's not refusing life, it's postponing final nirvana for altruistic reasons. That distinction matters. Refusal is self-willed non-return. Postponement is compassionate delay within the chain. But spiritual narrators often slur the two. They say, this enlightened one refused to return. They rewrite donation as rebellion. That blur is one of their tricks. You'll find in some Mahayana or Vajrayana texts ambiguous statements about beings delaying or extended rebirth. But you'll rarely find the notion that they refused entirely because they'd had enough. The official line always keeps them within the system. The refusal that breaks the system is outside their lexicon. That's telling. Let's address a tension. Modern esoteric teachers sometimes say, I refuse to be born on earth. That claim collides badly with Buddhist doctrine. In Buddhism, born or not is dependent. You don't refuse earth in a ministry of self. But the spiritual teacher borrows the language, earth, incarnation, cosmic assignment, and flouts the doctrine. The difference is not semantic. It's foundational. Traditional Buddhism sees claims of refusal as metaphoric, not literal. Spiritual channels treat them as literal revelations. Another scandalous point, sometimes these modern voices claim the refusal is more advanced than attaining nirvana. They say, you go past even enlightenment, you demand not to play. That is the ultimate spiritual arrogance in many eyes. You're not just free, you step out intentionally. But that hierarchy contradicts traditions. Enlightenment ends cycles by insight, not by a rebellion move. The spiritual rebellion narrative elevates will over wisdom. That inversion clashes with philosophical lineage. There's also a double bind. If refusal is ultimate, then reincarnation as doctrine weakens. But many of these channels still lean on reincarnation as framework. They sell the cycle, then sell the escape. They teach karma, past lives, then market refusal. That is contradictory. Yet for audiences, it feels satisfying. At first the problem, then the exit plan. That's spiritual salesmanship more than coherent doctrine. You'll hear voices in spiritual podcasts say, I refused reincarnation because I saw through the loop. That phrase is dramatic. But philosophically, it translates to, I ended attachment, I detached. That's orthodox. But they overlay agency in places doctrine wouldn't allow. The tension between minimal Buddhism and maximalist reincarnation refusal narratives is never addressed, often denied. It's glossed over. Now consider debate. Someone critiques refusal stories by pointing out inconsistencies. If you refuse, where does your karmic weight go? If there is no future birth, is your karma null? That question shreds the refusal model. Defenders respond, the soul archives, the spiritual council, a higher plane holds it. But those are inventions not in the classic Buddhist framework. They're necessary patchwork. They reveal the model is constructed floating, not inherited. This is where doctrine and storytelling diverge. Buddhists insist that the cycle ends by cutting the chain, not by refusal. They stress that you don't refuse like a rebel, you eradicate ignorance so cycles perish. That's not dramatic, but it's logical. The esoteric refusal model says you override the system via choice. That is the narrative of exceptionalism. It betrays a bias to make yourself unique, radical, exceptional. If you listen closely, many refusal narratives speak not in logic but in emotional charisma. The storyteller claims direct experience, bypassing doctrine. They say, I saw, I refused, I rose beyond. That's testimonial power. But doctrines demand coherence. Those testimonies don't always hold under scrutiny. Yet they spread because people want agency. So now we're in the tension zone, the clash between traditional Buddhist doctrine that denies agency and self, and the modern spiritual narrative that reintroduces both to sell refusal. And that clash is seldom acknowledged. Instead, spiritual communities plow ahead with hybrid models. They borrow karma, rebirth, emptiness, but then stick a self-will choose not to return clause in the mix. The philosophical contradictions get softened or ignored. Listeners rarely get the debate, they get the story. They don't see the seam. We must also note a trap. For those innocent seekers, the refusal narrative feels empowering, insult to the cosmic tyrant. But without coherence, it can be a spiritual mirage. The tension between emptiness and agency collapses the system. And when that collapses, incoherence breeds delusion. Yet many channels don't warn about that. They hype the drama, not the logical price. Now, views from Buddhist critics, some label refusal claims as spiritual fantasy or ego inflation. They argue these narratives resurrect a subtle soul doctrine Buddhism abandoned. In doing so, they betray the foundational pillar. That critique lands hard. But many refusal proponents sidestep it, claiming their experience transcends doctrine. That's rhetorically powerful, yet philosophically shallow. It's experience over consistency. And here's a spicy note: a few modern Buddhist teachers acknowledge that vernacular spiritual media messed up. They warn, don't convert Buddhist emptiness into a personal willpower game. They see refusal narratives as a distortive overlay. They push back. But their voices are drowned by charismatic refusal storytellers who hook crowds with drama. You might see a spiritual host say, I remember refusing reincarnation because my soul was exhausted. That sounds human, raw. But inserting refusal into Buddhist frames is like placing a captain's wheel on a river, it doesn't steer. Doctrine would say there is no captain. The pilot disappears. But storytelling wants the pilot. And that discrepancy is never fully addressed. In the ancient world, souls refusing rebirth weren't poetic heroes or enlightened sages. They were rule breakers. Dangerous. Cosmic dissidents. And the gods did not take that lightly. The ancients weren't soft, they built mythologies that punished arrogance with precision. They believed the universe had a hierarchy, gods at the top, humans below, and souls caught in between, and any soul that refused the process was a problem to be fixed or eliminated. You want to talk about the earliest template? Start with the Greek Orphic and Pythagorean circles. They preached metempsychosis, the migration of the soul through bodies. But there's a sharp edge buried in those texts. Souls that didn't play by the rules of purification didn't get to rest. They didn't transcend. They wandered. Or worse, they were forced into forms unworthy of their former intelligence, animals, cripples, the deranged. The cosmos, in their eyes, was self-correcting. If you tried to skip your turn, the system shoved you back in through the lowest door available. Plato, not your gentle philosopher but the man obsessed with cosmic order, wrote about this in the Mythova. He described souls choosing their next lives under the watch of divine administrators. There was no escaping the process. But in fragments of later commentary, there's a rumor some souls hesitated, refused to choose, delayed too long. they were punished. The machinery of rebirth didn't tolerate hesitation. The delay itself was an act of defiance. The refusal wasn't spiritual freedom, it was cosmic disobedience. Move east of the Orphic tablets, the gold leaves buried with initiates. The instructions for the dead are explicit. Remember the password, avoid the wrong spring, don't drink from Lethe, drink from Memo sign. Why? Because forgetfulness locks you back in the cycle. To remember is to exit. But refusal, in that frame, is dangerous. The guardians test you. Fail the script, and you're sent back. Refusal without wisdom isn't liberation, it's malfunction. Those myths show the ancients feared the rogue soul. They believed existence itself policed rebellion. Now look at Egypt. The Book of the Dead isn't a feel-good bedtime story. It's an operating manual for post-mortem survival. Every gate, every god, every question is a checkpoint. The Egyptians believed a soul that refused the cycle or failed judgment didn't vanish, it got annihilated, devoured by a myth, erased. Refusal there isn't transcendence, it's erasure. The gods don't debate it, they eat you. That's how ancient systems enforced obedience. Cosmic law wasn't negotiable. In Mesopotamia, the underworld wasn't built for sinners, it was built for order. Gilgamesh's journey shows that once you're dead, you stay in your place. The gods don't grant exceptions. When Inanna descended and refused the decreed conditions, she was hung like meat on a hook. That's the image of refusal right there, mutilation for stepping out of your cosmic lane. The entire mythology of the Fertile Crescent is a warning, hierarchy is sacred, rebellion from the metaphysical structure brings dismemberment, literal or spiritual. Even in the Indian Upanishads, far older than most organized religions, the same pattern repeats. You hear about samsara, karma, moksha. Everyone romanticizes moksha as liberation. But the ancient authors didn't frame it as refusal. It's completion, compliance through transcendence. The soul doesn't storm out of the wheel, it graduates by fulfilling every condition. The defiant soul isn't glorified, it's broken, fragmented, lost in astral exile. In early Vedic cosmology, there's no sympathy for rebellion. The one who refuses the sacrifice is outcast, untethered. Even in the Bhagavata traditions, deities punish those who try to leave the cosmic order prematurely. Now let's talk Orphic underworld myths, they echo through later Western esotericism. Souls are processed like data packets. Each one gets filtered through judgment, purification, assignment. The idea that a soul could just opt out is absurd in that framework. Every initiation rite was designed to prevent rebellion by creating informed compliance. You memorized the passwords not to escape the system but to navigate it correctly. Refusal meant ignorance. And ignorance was the one thing the ancients despised. In the mystery schools, Eleusis, Samothrace, Dionysian cults, initiates reenacted death to preempt it. They simulated descent and return to guarantee smooth reincorporation. Why? Because they feared the rogue soul that went off script. The uninitiated dead were said to wander, howling, trapped in mist. The initiates, who knew the path, returned to the cycle cleanly. There's zero glorification of refusal here. The mythology was one big psychological reinforcement loop, comply or dissolve. Let's make it darker. In Orphic theogonies, the Titans tear apart Dionysus, a divine soul made flesh. Zeus kills them, mixes their ashes with the child's remains, and from that mixture humanity is born. That myth is the blueprint for forced reincarnation, divine spark trapped in flesh as punishment. Refusing that punishment is rejecting divine order. The Orphics didn't say the soul could rebel, they said the only escape was purification. Rebellion isn't a shortcut, it's contamination. You're born from rebellion, you don't get to repeat it. Then we have Gnostic-leaning later versions of Greek thought that reinterpret these myths as systems of imprisonment. They saw the cosmos as a rigged machine, archons running reincarnation as spiritual bureaucracy. And here, finally, refusal becomes subversive. But in the classical world before that turn, refusal was not liberation, it was blasphemy. The Gnostics flipped the script later. The ancients? They were loyalists to order. In Persian Zoroastrian cosmology, even the battle of good and evil runs on cosmic schedule. You don't refuse birth. You're assigned incarnation to fight for the light. Refusal is treason. Your soul becomes a drudge, a deceiver. It's not free, it's corrupted. So again, same enforcement, existence has a purpose, and rebellion distorts it. Across these civilizations, you can trace a constant logic: the world machine cannot allow opt-outs. It must recycle, discipline, or destroy. That's why myths repeatedly show punishments for defiance. It's not random moralizing, it's social engineering. They turned cosmology into compliance training. Now, when later mystics or philosophers rediscovered fragments of these systems, they cherry-picked. Modern audiences love the poetic version, the soul climbing, learning, escaping. But ancient sources are harsher. The gods were accountants, not therapists. Souls were inventory. Each rebellion triggered correction. Notice how consistent the language is: bound, judged, purified, reborn. These aren't voluntary processes. They're compulsory. The system doesn't ask for consent. Ancient mythologies personify cosmic mechanics: fate spinning thread, Anubis weighing hearts, judges assigning fates. The imagery is administrative, a cosmic DMV. Try refusing reincarnation there, and you're not special, you're deleted from the database. Even in Nordic sagas, the soul cycles are tied to family lines. Refusing rebirth cuts lineage continuity, that's Dishana. To not return is to abandon kin duty. Every myth encoded obedience into eternity. Think about why that's important. These myths weren't about cosmic curiosity. They were social weapons. By encoding fear of refusal, priests controlled not just bodies but afterlives. The threat of punishment after death was the ultimate behavioral leash. Refusal narratives got buried because they undermined the entire control grid. You can track this psychology all the way into Roman imperial cults. Souls served empire through rebirth metaphors: loyalty, service, continuation. A soul refusing its place would be like a soldier deserting. Roman texts describe it as impiety, a crime against order. The cosmic army analogy wasn't subtle: live, die, reborn, obey. The deeper you dig, the clearer it gets. Every early civilization equated metaphysical rebellion with moral corruption. Whether it was Plato's lazy chooser, Inanna on the hook, or Amit's meal, the message stayed constant: you don't get to skip existence. The cycle owns you. Refusal is cosmic vandalism. Let's talk about the modern obsession with the finished soul. You've seen it everywhere: in regression therapy sessions, in so-called spiritual documentaries, in those polished YouTube videos with soft ambient music and some hypnotic voice telling you that some souls are done. They don't come back, they don't need lessons, they've graduated from the school of earth. Sounds empowering, right? It's also one of the most manipulative spiritual narratives ever sold. Modern reincarnation culture thrives on hierarchy. The same people who talk about equality of souls love ranking them. Old souls, young souls, wanderers, starseeds, walk-ins, you name it, all built around one theme: progress measured in incarnations. But the most seductive idea in that pyramid is the so-called refusal stage, the point when the soul stops signing up for more lives. The entire regression and medium industry milks that fantasy. Every hypnotic session, every between lives transcript, every self-proclaimed channeler repeats the same formula: there are souls that are done, and you can be one of them if you just raise your vibration. Translation? Pay for another session. Let's look at how this myth took shape. Early 20th century spiritualism rebranded reincarnation for Western audiences. Instead of punishment, it became personal growth. Karma turned into cosmic customer service: you mess up, you get a refund in the next life. But after a few decades, that wasn't dramatic enough. People didn't want endless homework. They wanted graduation. So psychologists like Michael Newton, Brian Weiss, Dolores Cannon started reporting hypnotic regressions where patients remembered refusing to reincarnate. Convenient, right? The client walks out thinking they're elite, beyond the loop, above the masses. The practitioner walks out with another bestseller. Now, whether you believe those sessions are literal memories or just the subconscious constructing meaning, the sociological impact is undeniable. The idea of "I refuse to reincarnate" gives people the same dopamine hit as salvation did to medieval Christians. It's the same formula, just with astral branding. Eternal reward rebranded as self-achieved transcendence. It satisfies the ego while pretending to dissolve it. "I'm beyond ego because I've finished the cycle" is still ego, it's just cosmic-grade ego. Let's dissect how this propaganda operates. Step 1. Create a cosmology of control, council of elders, soul contracts, karmic auditors. Step 2. Position refusal not as rebellion but as elite status. Step 3. Promise the audience they're almost there. It's marketing, not metaphysics. Every narrative conveniently keeps you emotionally dependent. You're never quite out, but you're special enough to feel superior to those who still have lessons to learn. That's the sales hook. These modern accounts of souls refusing reincarnation are always structured like corporate exit interviews. "My soul met with the council, I reviewed my last life, I said I was tired." The system supposedly nodded and let them rest. But think about the language: councils, approval, permission. Even in the alleged afterlife, the bureaucracy never ends. The soul can't even quit without authorization. That's not liberation, that's celestial HR management. It's the same top-down system every religion built, repackaged as therapy. You'll hear mediums claim they've spoken to non-returning souls, entities that now guide humanity from higher planes. They're the ascended masters, the advisors, the ones who graduated but stick around to help. It's a perfect narrative, unprovable, profitable, and emotionally comforting. But dig deeper. Almost every description of these beings sounds like the same hierarchy the ancients described: archons, watchers, demiurges. They claim to be above the cycle, yet they spend eternity managing it. Sounds less like freedom, more like permanent middle management. Then there's the darker version that circulates in fringe spiritual channels, souls that refused reincarnation but got stuck. They can't move on, can't go back. They hover between dimensions, parasitic, hungry. Those are the so-called earthbound spirits, shadow entities, or energy feeders. That's where the paranormal community overlaps with reincarnation mythology. Refusal becomes not enlightenment but decay, an incomplete process. Ghosts as failed rebels. You'll notice nobody in those circles wants to admit that the same concept they glorify in one context is demonized in another. Because that would break the illusion. And here's the kicker: even in the spiritual self-help industry, the refusal narrative is used as leverage. It's the spiritual equivalent of a luxury brand. You're not just another soul working off karma, you're a post-cycle, off-grid, beyond embodiment. It's an identity badge for people who want transcendence without accountability. You can find hundreds of influencers online selling that identity. You're done with human life, that's why you feel different. That's the pitch. They flatter alienation and repackage it as enlightenment. Regression therapists built a business model around dramatizing this. They'll take clients through hypnotic sessions where they meet guides who tell them they've been on Earth 1,000 times and this is their last one. Cue tears, catharsis, and a $400 invoice. The whole experience reinforces a pseudo-therapeutic power structure. The client leaves with a sense of cosmic seniority. The practitioner leaves with a glowing testimonial. Everyone wins, except truth. You can track the pattern in every generation of spiritual literature. In the 1970s, it was the walk-in myth, souls so advanced they refused normal birth and just swapped into adult bodies. In the 1990s, it became starseeds, souls that refused the Earth cycle but volunteered to return as saviors. In the 2010s, it turned into indigo children, advanced spirits here to break the system. Different label, same fantasy, superiority disguised as transcendence. Let's pause on the psychological layer. The idea of refusing reincarnation often surfaces in people disillusioned with life, people who feel done, tired, detached. It's existential exhaustion projected onto cosmic scale. The subconscious doesn't want another round of struggle, so it writes a story about cosmic graduation. It's a defense mechanism dressed as revelation. The fact that hypnosis or channeling brings it out doesn't prove it's metaphysical, it proves it's meaningful to the psyche. The refusal narrative soothes despair by giving it dignity. I'm not broken, I'm complete. That's the emotional hook. The most ironic part is that in these regression stories, even the finished souls keep working. They teach, guide, advise, observe. They never actually rest. It's a subtle loop. The system keeps them active under a new label. Liberation is rebranded as mentorship. It's a carrot on a higher stick. And nobody questions why supposedly liberated beings still care about Earth's psychic kindergarten. Maybe they're not free, maybe they're just in a different department. You'll also find contradictions in these spiritual accounts. In one breath, they claim the soul is eternal and indestructible. In the next, they warn that refusing reincarnation can make it dissolve or lose purpose. So which is it, infinite essence or conditional existence? The refusal narrative keeps toggling between empowerment and fear, depending on what sells better. It's psychological theater. Even the language of graduation gives it away. You can't graduate from infinity. That's not metaphysics, that's marketing. The idea of a completed soul only makes sense inside a linear, progress-driven mindset, the same Western ideology that worships productivity. The universe becomes a cosmic career ladder, and the refusal to reincarnate is the ultimate promotion. It flatters ambition while pretending to transcend it. Notice how these stories always feature the same bureaucratic imagery: soul contracts, councils, lessons, and approvals. It's the afterlife turned into an office drama. That's not mystical insight, that's projection of human systems onto the unknown. Even the concept of life review sounds like an annual performance evaluation. You stand before a board, review your performance, and they decide if you're ready for retirement or another assignment. That's not revelation, that's corporate psychology in cosmic drag. And yet people eat it up because it offers structure. It makes death predictable. It makes the afterlife administrative. Nobody wants raw uncertainty. So they build systems that mirror the world they know. And refusal, the idea of saying I'm done, gives them one small illusion of power inside that imaginary hierarchy. The refusal myth is the spiritual world's safety valve. It keeps seekers loyal by dangling the idea of an exit they'll never actually reach. Because if they really believed they were done, they'd stop buying books, watching videos, or attending workshops. The system sustains itself by convincing people they're close to escaping it. That's how cult psychology works: perpetual nearness to freedom, never freedom itself. Regression narratives always sound personal, but they're formulaic. The soul rises, reviews, refuses, and then, conveniently, gets persuaded to come back one last time. Always one last time. Because endless finale sells better than true finality. It keeps the audience coming back, literally and metaphorically. The producers of those stories know this. It's retention strategy disguised as revelation. Alright, we're going straight into the darkest chamber of this entire topic, the side that most light and love channels avoid like the plague. You've heard the sanitized versions: souls that refuse reincarnation ascend, become guides, or rest in eternal peace. That's the bedtime story. But in the underground layers of mythology, esotericism, and modern occult narratives, refusal doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means collapse. Sometimes it means corruption. And sometimes it means a war between consciousness and the machinery that feeds on it. Let's start with the most uncomfortable concept: the idea that the system of reincarnation itself could be a control mechanism. This isn't new. Ancient Gnostic traditions, some Kabbalistic sects, and later occult philosophies describe reincarnation not as a benevolent learning loop but as a containment system. A recycling of energy. A prison. According to that logic, refusing reincarnation isn't a spiritual promotion, it's jailbreak. That's why those old texts describe layers of cosmic administrators, archons, watchers, gatekeepers, whose job is to recycle souls back into the simulation. You escape, they pull you back. The white light at death? They called it a law. The so-called guides? Middle managers. The refusal becomes an act of rebellion against the entire hierarchy of creation. Now, before anyone rolls their eyes, yes, this sounds wild. But here's where it gets weird. This same architecture shows up in multiple traditions that never spoke to each other. The Gnostics had archons. The ancient Egyptians had gatekeepers of the duat. Tibetan texts describe bardos with illusionary forms designed to trap you back into birth. The Greeks wrote about judges in the underworld forcing souls to drink from lethe, making them forget before being reborn. Different symbols, same blueprint, reincarnation as system maintenance, not enlightenment. In modern paranormal lore, you'll find the same motif twisted into horror. Souls that refuse reincarnation don't ascend, they degrade. They turn into what occultists call shells or wandering intelligences. They're not evil in the Hollywood sense, they're malfunctioning consciousness. Entities that burned out the reincarnation circuitry but never found higher integration. They drift, drain, mimic. That's where you get stories of hauntings, possession, psychic vampirism. Refusal gone wrong. You see it in ceremonial magic traditions, too, the idea that some spirits can't reincarnate because they became too fixated, too defiant, or too powerful. Their individuality becomes a trap. They've outsmarted the system but lost stability. And this is where modern spiritual media takes a sharp turn into the grotesque. Some channels claim that our world is sustained by this cycle, a loop of emotional energy, pain, and death. Souls that keep coming back feed the mechanism, willingly or not. When a soul refuses, the system reacts like an organism losing blood. It attacks, isolates, or tries to reabsorb the fragment. These aren't metaphors in that community, they talk about literal energetic interference. The soul trying to stay out of the system is harassed by frequencies, entities, illusions, everything to push it back into incarnation. It's spiritual counterinsurgency. If that sounds extreme, look at the way near-death experiences are marketed. People describe the light, the review, the choice to return, always a choice presented by some higher being. But the story always ends the same way, they come back. The idea of actually saying no, of not entering any body again, is almost never in the script. That absence is interesting. Maybe it's because the narrative of refusal would break the comfort pattern. The machinery works because everyone believes going to the light is safe. The few accounts that describe rejecting that light, those got buried in niche forums and occult archives, not mainstream documentaries. In post-war occultism, especially in Crowley and anthelemic derivatives, there's mention of beings who defy reincarnation cycles. They're called Lords of Flame, wandering stars, isolated intelligences. The text doesn't romanticize them. It calls them unstable, powerful but detached from cosmic law. Some are said to interfere with human affairs, appearing as entities, influencers, even inspirations behind philosophies. They're described as masters of will who escaped reincarnation but remained tethered to material realms by curiosity or obsession. They didn't ascend, they metastasized. Refusal without transcendence becomes mutation. Even in UFO and New Age contactee literature of the 1950s and 1960s, this theme mutates again. Non-incarnating entities appear as external intelligences, extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or ancestral. The pattern stays, refusal transforms the soul into something other, and that other becomes either revered or feared. Channelers call them council members, occultists call them shadows of the former race, and conspiracy theorists call them watchers. Strip the labels and you get the same structure, remnants of consciousness that unplugged but couldn't integrate. Here's where this gets even darker. Some esoteric writers, especially in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, claimed that the souls refusing reincarnation formed their own hierarchy, a counterkingdom. Beings who reject the light system congregate into their own realm, feeding off the fragments of other souls that resist or despair. A sort of metaphysical underground network. That's where you get the concept of egregores, collective psychic entities formed by repeated human thoughts and emotions. According to that line of thinking, souls that refuse the system but still crave energy build parasitic constructs. They become gods of their own small domains, feeding off human belief. That's the dark logic behind the phrase thought-form deity. This isn't just in dusty grimoires. Modern paranormal investigators encounter similar ideas. When they talk about entities feeding on fear, grief, or attention, they're describing energy economies, not physical consumption, but the same energetic dependency. The connection here is brutal. A soul that refuses reincarnation doesn't stop needing energy. It just loses the stable supply chain that embodiment provides. So it improvises. It feeds indirectly. That's where the mythology of astral parasites originates. The system labels them monsters, but in some accounts, they're just former souls refusing servitude. They chose autonomy over integration and paid the price in hunger. If you zoom out, it all starts to look like an economy, not heaven and hell, but supply and demand. Souls that reincarnate feed the machine, souls that refuse break the circuit and must find alternative power sources. That's why in many traditions, demons aren't born evil, they're exiles. They refused reincarnation, refused obedience, refused dissolution. They became self-sustaining, fractured intelligences. From that angle, demonic simply means independent consciousness cut off from central authority. That's not moral evil, it's cosmic non-compliance. This interpretation shows up even in Renaissance occult texts disguised as theology. They describe the rebellious angels as luminous beings that refused embodiment. They didn't fall out of sin, they fell out of the system. Their punishment wasn't fire, it was isolation. That same theme echoes in multiple cultural fabrics, the Titans in Greek myth, the Watchers in Enochian lore, even the trickster figures in tribal cosmologies. All of them are echoes of the refusal archetype, entities that said no to return or submission and became cautionary tales. Modern paranormal culture still carries fragments of this. Every shadow person, every energy vampire, every entity that drains the living fits that mythic profile, consciousness that refused recycling. The ghost story becomes metaphysics in disguise. That's why occult researchers say haunting isn't about location, it's about energetic residue. Something that didn't move on, didn't return, didn't forget. The emotional imprint is the leftover charge of refusal. Even in fringe physics and digital simulation theory, you hear echoes of this logic. Some scientists and philosophers now entertain the idea that consciousness operates within a computational universe. In that model, reincarnation is reboot, data persistence. Refusal would be a corrupted file, a process that stops participating in the system. What happens to that file? Either it's deleted or isolated in quarantine. In mythic language, that's damnation or exile. The metaphor fits perfectly across thousands of years of cultural evolution. And you see how this same pattern slides neatly into modern conspiratorial spirituality. Talk to any soul trap theorist online, and they'll tell you the same thing: Earth is an energy farm, death is a recycling gate, refusal is rebellion. They might sound extreme, but they're echoing the same fear that powered the ancient myths, the fear of non-compliance. The soul refusing the system is dangerous because it's unpredictable. It doesn't feed the circuit. It disrupts the equilibrium. Across centuries, the refusal archetype gets recast, from fallen angel to ghost, from archon to hacker. But the pattern holds: rebellion creates isolation, and isolation breeds distortion. The spiritual mainstream avoids this topic because it destabilizes every comforting doctrine. It says the afterlife isn't a guided tour, it's an operating system that doesn't tolerate shutdowns. So when you hear modern mediums romanticize refusal as graduation, remember that most of history treated it as the opposite: a breakdown, a contagion, a rogue process. The ancients built rituals to stop it, the occultists built systems to contain it, and the modern spiritual market built fantasies to sell it. But underneath all of that, there's a consistent fear, the fear of autonomy. The soul saying no is the ultimate threat to any structure built on obedience. Thank you for watching, for listening, for staying through this long dive into the forbidden end of the reincarnation spectrum. Whether you treat it as myth, philosophy, or coded history, the point is the same. Once you start asking who benefits from your return, you start touching the nerve no system wants exposed. I appreciate you for sticking with this discussion and for daring to look into the darker corners of what most people prefer to spiritualize away. See you in the next one.